huge, gigantic waterfall, second largest waterfall in the world, larger than Niagara. And just on the Brazilian side, we're working with a project to reintroduce blue and gold macaws and green-winged macaws back into the national park. So, yes, those birds will be in Argentina as much time as they'll be spending in Brazil, because all they're doing is going back and forth across the river. But we're working with the group in Brazil itself.
I also see you're in Bolivia too, right?
Yes, we've spent quite a bit of time in Bolivia with those projects.
I think that was one of our first projects
that we
Bolivia.
Supported, yes, that's true.
The blue-throated macaw project and the red-fronted macaw project, right?
Yeah, we've spent most of our time that we've been involved in Bolivia has been with the blue-throated macaw project, and we have several projects there. One is supporting the Armonía Laurel Park Foundation project for nest boxes in the wild. Mm-hmm. And we have a second project where we're working with the indigenous population to try to teach them and convince them not to use wild macaw feathers in their headdresses. The local Indians actually build headdresses much like American Indian headdresses, except they're made out of macaw tail feathers, and one headdress would take 10 to 40 macaws to make one headdress. And they're taking these birds out of the wild, and they have processions during their religious celebrations where there'll be hundreds of men wearing these headdresses in parades. So we've worked with creating a contest for alternatives to macaw feathers for the creation of these headdresses, and to encourage the use of these alternative headdress materials, and that's been a very successful project also.
That's very interesting. I think that is such an interesting and challenging effort that you're talking about in the indigenous realm. How did they respond to you about this, though?
Well, they will only respond. I'm sorry, Marie could easily answer this question. They will only respond in a positive way if there's value to them. If they can see a value in that particular project or that bird. Otherwise, they respond very poorly to having first world country people go in and tell them how they should run their life. That's absurd from anybody's standpoint. That's rude and unacceptable. So what we do is try to develop a project and let them see that the project has value to them. So when we did the alternative headdress contest, the first thing was to get everybody's attention. So we had three prizes. First prize was $500, second prize was $400, third prize was, I think, $300, which isn't a lot of money, except the average monthly income in this particular area of Bolivia is less than $100 per month. So a $500 prize was essentially almost a half a year of income. So that was a big attention getter. Once the project, that particular headdress project, was culminated, then we developed a second project, an offshoot of that, where we teach the local people how to make artificial macaw feathers, and they are amazing. The talent that they've got now to make these artificial feathers. That we had one of the headdresses was at a large conservation conference in Spain. It was brought over there as for a show and as a gift, and we had researchers totally outraged and running up to this large headdress, demanding to know who could have possibly made this out of macaw tail feathers.
And why we would support them.
Yes, and these are people that all they do with their life is work with macaws and trying to save them. And they didn't realize until they were inches away from it that these were all artificial feathers.
How interesting.
So now these people in Bolivia have figured it's very expensive to buy these macaw tail feathers to make their headdresses. So now we've created a
A substitute.
A substitute, a living where certain communities can create income by making artificial feathers and selling them to the other communities. So that then becomes the way that we direct them away from natural, poor parrots.
How do they get the tail feathers from the macaws?
Unfortunately, they shoot them.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, that's the only way they have.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yes.
Wow.
So that's why I say one headdress represents the death of 10 to 40 macaws. So this.
It's huge.
Yeah, that's a big deal in this particular area.
And I imagine you work through translators.
Yes, and the local people, the project leaders, are all very fluent in the local language. So the person that's the lead investigator for the blue-throated macaw project, it was raised in that particular department. We call them states. They call them departments, and it's in the Beni department of Bolivia. So that would be one project where reaching the people is key to saving the parrot. Another example of that is our Lear's Macaw project. We call it the Lear's Macaw Corn Subsidy Project. And the Lear's Macaws is one of the large blue macaws. It's a little bit smaller than the hyacinth macaw, which is the largest of all the macaws, the largest parrot, flying parrot. And the Lear's macaw was down to about 150 birds total in the wild. And their biggest pressure was poaching. Some were poached, but the biggest pressure on this particular bird was what I call death by farmer, where they would come down out of their breeding cliffs and land on these little indigent farmers' cornfields and eat their corn. And these cornfields were small, like an acre. And that was the livelihood of these farmers. They have no electricity, no irrigation. They have no tractors. Everything is done with an ox pulling a plow, and it's almost agriculture out of the, say, 16th century.
Interesting.
So when these macaws would come down and eat the farmers' fields, they were actually robbing the food out of their family's mouth, so they would shoot the birds. So we created a way to make the macaws valuable to these indigent corn farmers, and we essentially pay them to allow the birds to feed in their corn fields. And then at the end of the season, the growing season, our field technician goes in and goes to each one of their plots, evaluates how much damage the parrots have caused. Some none. Some have extreme damage. And we rate them on 4 levels. None, some, quite a bit, bad. And they get reimbursed by the unit area of the size of their little farm in hectares. They get reimbursed either 4 sacks of corn, 3 sacks of corn, 2 sacks of corn, or no sacks of corn per unit area. And we deliver that corn to the farmers. So now the parrots have become an asset rather than a liability, because even if the parrots feed on their corn, they know that they're going to get reimbursed essentially in full, and it's worth it to them. Then they can sit back, watch the birds, and instead of going out and harvesting all that corn, it gets delivered to them on their front door in sacks. And we started the program in 2005 when there was about 150 Lear's macaws left in the wild. There's now over 1,000 in the wild.
That's beautiful.
And each year we've been dispersing about 25 to 30 tons of corn. So a very, very large amount of corn.
I hope it's not GMO corn.
No, it's not.
And corn is relatively inexpensive as well.
Wow. You're solving all kinds of problems on a whole systems level to make this work.
Yes, but as I mentioned, many times it's the main thing, which was a surprise to us, actually, when we really got involved and realized that the key to many of these problems is working with the local people. That if you don't work with the local people, the project will fail.
You're rainmakers, both of you. That's what you're doing.
You know, it was so sad the first time we went over to assess the Lear's corn to see what the damage was and everything. We were told by some of the farmers that they would keep their kids home from school so that they could run around the field and scare away the birds.